Michael's alarm shattered the pre-dawn quiet at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before it was supposed to ring. His hand found the phone in the darkness, muscle memory from 2 years of the same routine. The house held that particular stillness that only existed when children slept, a sacred, fragile peace. He slipped from bed, bare feet finding the exact floorboards that wouldn't creak, a father's choreography perfected through necessity. The coffee maker gurgled its familiar morning song while he stood at the kitchen window, watching streetlights fade against the approaching dawn. His reflection stared back, 34 years old, shadows under brown eyes that remembered how to laugh but had forgotten when. The tie he'd selected hung over the chair, conservative navy because anything else might draw attention. Drawing attention meant interactions. Interactions with her meant complications his heart couldn't afford. Emma. Even thinking her name sent his pulse into that uncomfortable rhythm between anxiety and something else he refused to name. She'd taken over as CEO 18 months ago, transforming their comfortable tech firm into something sleek and demanding. Her heels clicked through hallways like a countdown timer, and wherever she went, the air seemed to thin. She had this way of looking at people that made them feel simultaneously seen and found wanting. Michael had watched 3 department heads transfer out rather than face those glacier blue eyes during performance reviews. The worst part was her brilliance. It would have been easier if she'd been merely intimidating, but Emma Chen possessed the kind of mind that solved problems others didn't know existed. She'd remember details from conversations months old, could quote his reports verbatim, knew every employee's name and their children's ages. Which meant she knew about Lily. Sweet Lily, 7 years old next month, who slept upstairs clutching the stuffed elephant that had belonged to her mother. Michael's throat tightened the way it always did when he thought about Sarah. 2 years, 4 months, and 16 days since the accident. The counselor said the counting would stop eventually, but fathers who loved completely didn't forget such mathematics. He moved through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. Shower in 8 minutes. Shave in 3. Dress in 5, leaving the tie for last, a small rebellion against the corporate armor. By 5:30, he was making Lily's lunch, cutting her sandwich into triangles because squares were boring, daddy. Apple slices with no skin. Goldfish crackers counted out in even numbers because odd numbers were lonely. A note tucked inside that said, "Daddy loves you to the moon and back," illustrated with his terrible drawing of a rocket ship that she somehow always recognized. The photograph on the refrigerator caught his eye. Last year's Halloween, Lily dressed as a butterfly with wings Sarah had started sewing. Michael had finished them with clumsy fingers and YouTube tutorials, crying over the sewing machine at midnight. But Lily's smile in that photo made every pricked finger worth it. That smile was Sarah's greatest gift, living on in their daughter's face. His phone buzzed. An email from Emma, sent at 5:33 a.m. Team meeting moved to 8 a.m. Mandatory attendance. New project parameters. His stomach dropped. The early meeting meant no time to drop Lily at school. It meant calling Mrs. Martinez next door, again. It meant disappointing eyes over breakfast when he explained Daddy had to leave early. This was the dance, the impossible choreography of single parenthood against corporate demands. Emma scheduled meetings without warning, expected instant responses to weekend emails, praised dedication in ways that felt like threats. She'd never said it directly, but the message was clear: excellence required sacrifice. And Michael needed this job. The insurance, the stability, the college fund growing dollar by dollar for Lily's future. He climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. Lily's room glowed soft pink from the nightlight she pretended not to need. She lay sprawled across her bed, one arm flung wide, the other clutching Ellie the elephant. Her hair, Sarah's honey-colored waves, spread across the pillow like spilled sunshine. Michael sat on the bed's edge, his weight barely disturbing the mattress, and touched her shoulder with the gentleness reserved for butterfly wings and breaking hearts. "Morning, sweetheart." Her eyes opened slowly, focused, then crinkled with a smile that made his chest ache. "Is it a daddy morning?" The hope in her voice was a knife between his ribs. "I'm sorry, baby. Daddy has to go to work early today." The smile dimmed but didn't disappear. Lily had learned disappointment young but wore it with grace that shouldn't belong to 7-year-olds. "Mrs. Martinez makes pancakes too squishy." "I know. I'll talk to her about it." He pulled her close, breathing in her little girl's smell of strawberry shampoo and dreams. "But tomorrow's Saturday. We'll make our own pancakes. Extra chocolate chips. With whipped cream faces. The silliest faces ever created." She giggled against his chest, and for a moment, the world contained only this: a father, a daughter, and love strong enough to bridge any absence. Then his phone buzzed again. Another email. The subject line visible even from where he sat: quarterly reports, need revision ASAP. 40 minutes later, Michael sat in traffic, watching brake lights stretch toward a horizon of obligations. Mrs. Martinez had been gracious, as always, though he'd seen the concern in her eyes. "You work too hard, Mijo," she'd said, touching his cheek with a grandmother's knowing. "That little girl needs her papa more than any job needs you." But Mrs. Martinez hadn't seen the medical bills from Sarah's last week. She didn't know about the second mortgage or the therapy sessions that insurance barely covered. She didn't understand that sometimes love meant working yourself hollow so your daughter never had to know the word without. The office building loomed ahead, 40 floors of glass and ambition. Emma's car was already in the executive spot, a sleek black Tesla that matched her wardrobe and demeanor. Michael parked in the furthest corner of the garage, buying himself walking minutes to prepare his face. Neutral expression. Competent but not eager. Visible enough to avoid attention for absence, invisible enough to avoid attention for presence. The elevator rose through floors of increasing importance. His desk lived on 23, respectable middle management, close enough to matter but far enough to avoid constant scrutiny. Except Emma had ways of making distance irrelevant. She'd appear at cubicles without warning, asking questions that revealed she'd been watching, always watching. He'd learned her patterns, though. Emma took coffee at 7:15 in her office. Conference calls from 9 to 10. She walked the floors after lunch, making unpredictable rounds. But there were gaps, windows of safety where a careful employee could navigate the building's geography undetected. Michael had become an expert at being urgently needed elsewhere whenever those heels clicked his direction. The meeting room filled with familiar faces wearing familiar expressions, the careful blankness of employees who'd learned that enthusiasm and reluctance were equally dangerous. Emma stood at the head of the table, a presentation glowing behind her. She wore charcoal today, a suit that meant business without trying. Her hair, usually confined in a bun tight enough to pull at her temples, hung loose past her shoulders. It made her look younger, almost approachable, which somehow made her more dangerous. "Good morning, everyone." Her voice carried that particular quality of authority wrapped in velvet. "I know it's early, but opportunity doesn't wait for convenience." She clicked through slides about market projections and innovation strategies. Michael took notes he'd never read, maintaining the illusion of engagement while his mind calculated whether he could slip out during the break. Then she said his name. "Michael, I'd like you to head the development team for this project." Every eye turned to him. His throat went dry. Leading meant visibility. Visibility meant interaction. Interaction meant those ice-blue eyes examining his work, his dedication, his every professional breath. "I'm honored," he managed, the words ash in his mouth. "When would you need?" "We'll meet Monday to discuss parameters. 7 a.m. sharp." She moved on without waiting for response, the matter settled in her mind. 7 a.m. meant no morning routine with Lily. It meant rushed goodbye kisses and disappointed eyes becoming routine instead of exception. But declining meant questions, attention, potential consequences that rippled into bank accounts and birthday presents. The meeting concluded with Emma's trademark efficiency. People scattered like startled birds, but her voice caught him at the door. "Michael." A moment. The room emptied, leaving them in that peculiar silence of abandoned conference rooms. She stood by the window, morning light painting her profile in shades of gold that seemed too warm for someone so controlled. "Your daughter. Lily, isn't it?" His spine stiffened. "Yes. 7 next month." It wasn't a question. Of course she knew. Emma knew everything that might affect productivity. It must be challenging. The balance. "I manage." She turned from the window, and for a heartbeat, something flickered in her eyes, something that might have been understanding or might have been calculation. With Emma, the line between human and strategic often blurred. "I'm sure you do. That's why I selected you for this project. You're reliable, Michael. Consistent. Those are rare qualities." The praise felt like pressure, expectations wrapped in compliments. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This project will be demanding. Long hours. Weekend work. Can you handle that?" Could he handle more absence from Lily's life? More mornings of disappointment? More bedtimes missed? But the alternative whispered its own threats: unemployment, instability, failing the one person who depended on him completely. "I'll make it work." Emma nodded, dismissing him with a gesture so subtle it might have been imagined. Michael escaped to the hallway, his heart pounding with the peculiar adrenaline of survival. He'd agreed to more time away from Lily, more erosion of their fragile routine. But he'd kept his job, kept their security, kept the wolf from their door for another day. The rest of the morning blurred past in emails and spreadsheets. He called the school during lunch, confirming Lily had arrived safely, that Mrs. Martinez had remembered the signed permission slip for the field trip. The secretary recognized his voice now, offered reassurances with the patience reserved for worried single parents. His phone wallpaper showed Lily at the beach last summer, laughing as waves chased her feet. Sarah had loved the ocean, had wanted to live somewhere where Lily could grow up with sand between her toes. Another promise Michael couldn't keep, another way he was failing the memory of the woman who'd trusted him with everything. Around 2 o'clock, his strategic avoidance faced its first test. Emma emerged from the elevator just as he was returning from the break room. The hallway offered no escape routes, no convenient doorways or sudden urgent calls. She approached with that measured stride that made distance irrelevant, and Michael found himself frozen, coffee cooling in his hand. Working through lunch? She noted his desk sandwich wrapper visible through the break room's glass wall. Just grabbing coffee. Dedication. The word landed between compliment and observation. "That's what I appreciate about you, Michael. You understand priorities." Did he? His priority was asleep in 2nd grade, learning multiplication tables and missing her mother. But that truth lived in a world parallel to this one, where CEOs discussed market shares and innovation metrics. "The project proposal," Emma continued, "I'll need your preliminary thoughts by Friday." Friday. 3 days. 3 bedtime stories he'd have to rush. 3 mornings of leaving before breakfast. Of course. She studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to read thoughts like ticker tape. "You look tired." "I'm fine." Self-care is also a priority, Michael. Burnout serves no one. The irony of Emma Chen lecturing about work-life balance might have been funny if it weren't so sharp. This was the woman who sent emails at 3 a.m., who worked through holidays, who seemed to exist solely in the space between ambition and achievement. "I'll keep that in mind." She moved past him, her perfume leaving a trail of something expensive and cold. Michael released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Another encounter survived, another day closer to whatever finish line single fathers ran toward: college graduation, wedding days, grandchildren he could spoil without the weight of sole responsibility. The afternoon stretched toward evening, and Michael watched the clock with the attention of a condemned man. 5:30 meant he could leave without seeming eager. 5:30 meant dinner with Lily, homework help, bath time with too many bubbles. 5:30 meant being daddy instead of employee, heart instead of function. But at 5:27, Emma appeared at his desk. The Morrison contract needs review. Legal flagged some concerns. She placed a folder thick enough to kill hope on his desk. I need your analysis by morning. The folder might as well have been made of lead. Tonight? Is that a problem? Yes. It was Lily's favorite dinner night, Taco Tuesday, which had somehow migrated to Thursday but kept its name. It was reading Chapter 3 of Charlotte's Web, with voices for every character. It was everything that mattered and nothing that paid bills. No. No problem. Emma lingered a moment longer, and again that flicker crossed her features, something almost human beneath the corporate armor. Thank you, Michael. I know I ask a lot. Then she was gone, leaving him with a folder full of someone else's priorities and a phone call he didn't want to make. Mrs. Martinez answered on the second ring, her voice warm with the kind of understanding that made disappointment worse. Of course, Mijo. Lily can have dinner here. We're making enchiladas. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her, what could he tell a 7-year-old about necessity and survival, about choosing between presence and provision? I'll tell her daddy loves her. That's all she needs to know. Michael stayed until almost 10, the office emptying around him like a tide pulling back to reveal the debris of ambition. The Morrison contract was a mess of legal language and loopholes, requiring the kind of attention that made his eyes burn and his soul ache. Emma's office light remained on, a beacon of expectation in the darkened building. When he finally made it home, Lily was asleep on Mrs. Martinez's couch, still in her school clothes, homework scattered across the coffee table. Her mouth was slightly open, one hand stretched toward the homework as if she'd fallen asleep waiting for help that hadn't come. She tried to stay awake, Mrs. Martinez whispered. Said she wanted to tell you about the butterfly they found at recess. Michael gathered his daughter with the care of someone handling spun glass. She stirred but didn't wake, instinctively curling into his chest with the trust that made his eyes sting. Mrs. Martinez squeezed his shoulder, a benediction and absolution in one gesture. At home, he carried Lily to her room, changed her into pajamas with the skill of someone who'd learned to dress sleeping children. She mumbled something about butterflies and daddy, then settled back into dreams he hoped were kind. Michael sat on her bed for a long moment, watching her breathe, memorizing the curve of her cheek and the way her lashes cast shadows in the nightlight's glow. This was the truth Emma Chen would never understand, that some priorities couldn't be spreadsheet, that love was its own demanding CEO, that balance was a myth told by people who'd never had to choose between a bedtime story and a steady paycheck. His phone buzzed. Another email from Emma. Excellent work on the Morrison analysis. Your attention to detail is exceptional. He deleted it without responding. Praise from Emma felt like chains made of gold, pretty but still binding. Tomorrow would bring new demands, new moments stolen from the life he was supposedly working to provide. The cycle would continue, grinding them both down to essentials, until Lily was old enough to understand or too old to care. But tonight, in the soft glow of a butterfly nightlight, Michael Torres made a different kind of peace with necessity. He kissed his daughter's forehead, whispered promises into her dreams, and prepared for another day of strategic avoidance, of being visible enough to survive but invisible enough to protect what remained of his heart. The photograph of Sarah watched from Lily's dresser, and Michael met those frozen eyes with the weight of someone carrying multiple worlds. I'm trying, he whispered to the woman who'd trusted him with everything. I'm trying to be enough. Outside, the city hummed with the sound of other people's ambitions, other people's compromises. But in this room, in this moment, there was only a father, a daughter, and the terrible mathematics of love divided by necessity. Tomorrow would bring Emma's demands and Lily's needs, pulling him in directions that never quite aligned. But tomorrow was hours away. Tonight, he had this: the sound of his daughter's breathing, the lingering scent of strawberry shampoo, and the fierce determination to somehow make broken pieces form a whole life. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was what he had, and Michael Torres had learned that sometimes love meant making insufficient offerings with your whole heart. The Morrison contract could wait until dawn. Emma's expectations could hunger until morning. Right now, his world had narrowed to this room, this child, this moment of guarding sleep and dreams. Everything else was just noise, demanding but ultimately powerless against the quiet revolution of a father choosing presence, even if only for these stolen hours between today's failures and tomorrow's compromises.